The sea had a way of wiping a face clean of everything, except what it had carved there itself. Wind and salt, the steady reckoning of the tides. The soft grit of blown sand and the rime of spray worked their will upon cliff and man alike. Yara stood on the seaward parapet above the great keep, hair blown back and lips crusted white with salt, and let the squall do as it pleased. She had the look of her father about the jaw when she said it hard. Balin's iron there, though without the fanatic's glare that had burned from his eyes until the day the rope bridge broke and the waves took him. Her gaze was cool and measuring as she studied the black chop below, and the thicker bruise of cloud shouldering up from the west. A winter-bellied storm. It would blow hard before evening and make liars of any man who boasted he could read a sea at a glance. The sea allowed no certainties for long. Behind her the castle groaned with its old familiar voices. Chains rasped. Door leather creaked. A shutter banged and carried on banging until a thrall hurried to tie it up. Tar smoke curled from braziers, thick as weaver's wool and flavored with the sharpness of pitch. Within, the stones were damp, though fires burned, and rushes had been changed only yesterday. Damp is honest, her father had once said when she was little enough to walk the galleries with her hand swallowed in his. Damp meant the sea had not forgotten you. She had believed it then, and even now, it rang in her like a prayer learned too young to be shaken loose. But damp also meant coughing children, and old men whose bones ached so deeply that not even warm wine could reach them. "Captain," said her boatswain, appearing at her back with a careful scuff so as not to startle. Harl was his name, an alderman's son taken in a raid off the Mander 20 years ago, and captain in all but name aboard Blackwind. She trusted Harl the way one trusts a blade. One has sharpened for long enough, it has learned one's hand. "The yardmaster is below. He asks for you." "What does he want?" "He'll want things we can't spare, and he'll promise to return us tenfold the worth in the spring," Harl said, pulling his cloak tighter. "Timber and iron and men. Always men. Bring him to the yard. I'll see him there. And have the carpenters gather, even the sullen ones." Bah. Harl nodded and withdrew, knowing better than to offer the little courtesies or comforts that sometimes drew a half smile from other captains. Yara wore her smiles as tightly coiled as her anger. There were too many fronts to soften, too many angles to watch for splinters. She took the steps down carved into the living rock of Pike's Keep, passing a priest of the drowned god on his way up, hair dripping into his beard. He smelt of brine and the cold stink of old fish. Aaron's acolytes had multiplied since Urin's brief reign of madness. They were thin, tireless men who believed they could unmake a world that had turned against them by going under it and coming up new. She brushed past with a nod and nothing more. The acolyte lifted wet eyes to her, pity in them or sorrow or contempt. She could not tell, and whispered, "What is dead may never die, but rises again harder and stronger," she said without thinking and without warmth. "Harder," the man murmured as if tasting the word. "Stronger, or softer and wetted, if one keeps dripping long enough." "Babe, go soak yourself," she said, but not unkindly, and took the next turn into the yard. Lord Sport's dockyards made their own weather. The walls gathered wind and held it, sent it scouring and twisting, so that flags cracked and the smell of roasted limpets from the cook's fire went fleeing out the gates in a line like a drawn stitch. Yara liked the yard best on days like this, when the wind smoked and knocked people into one another and the craft was loud enough to drown out the talk. Here men did not speak much of kingsmoots and madness, of crowns forged from drift dreams. Here they measured, cut, swore, bled, and built. The yardmaster, a blocky man with a double scar along one cheek, was waiting with his cap in hand. He had the look of a man forever braced for disappointment. Beside him were the carpenters Harl had summoned. Herrick, who could cut a rib that fit so flush, there was no kiss of light between wood and wood. Thin Jella with hair tucked under a cowl, who had made a mast for the Wraith so true that in a gale the sail's cloth sang like a plucked string. Kryn with 3 fingers gone, and a temper he wore like another missing piece. "Captain," the yardmaster said, The winters set its teeth. The last of that good oak you brought from Green Harbor is stacked out of the rain, but we'll need to lay down new Kielson timbers, and I'll not trust the soft heartwood from Harlaw's inland copses for that. The sea eats soft hearts, and there's the long and short of it. Ben? Yara drew breath. The words she had practiced often enough alone came to her mouth and stood there, as if uncertain whether to fight or kneel. She was no maester and no reader. Numbers had bewildered her once. They were beginning to bite at her hands the way rope burned when you held on too tight. "We're not laying new longships," she said, and saw the yardmaster's face twist as if she had struck him. "Not as we have. We'll widen 3 and raise their sides. We'll put a fuller belly on Black Wind's sisters and deepen their holds. We'll build 2 with broader beams after the Irish manner, with high fore and aft to keep the spray off, and a deck that won't ship water like a bucket with a crack. We'll keep the speed in the waterline, but we'll give them a merchant's bones." Silence fell in the yard as if someone had cut the rope that held the wind taut. Tar bubble popped and hissed. The yardmaster looked at her with something wounded in his eyes. "Ogh," he said, making of the word an insult. "You want me to hang a fat belly on a longship and teach it to waddle like a sow?" "I want our people to eat," Yara said. "I want to fill bellies with barley no storm can wash out, and with salt beef that has a winter in it already. I want coin that clinks and buys what pride can't. I want the name Greyjoy to be a warren in a harbor, not a warning bell. And the old way?" Kryn spat into the slush. "Do we change the god too? Do we drown the thing that made us? Bens. The old way has starved our children more reliably than it has filled their bellies," she said. "Every raid has its cost, and the sea has taken that cost patiently from us for generations. We kept counting the stolen spoons and forgetting the dead sons. We are ironborn," Hurik said softly, as if reminding her of her own name, as if telling the sea its color. "We will be ironborn," Yara answered, "and rich besides." Gela's eyes had taken light when she spoke of the Mirish manor. "High fore and aft," she said. "A square sail thicker woven with longer yards. A second mast may be added if we hope to beat back against a contrary wind without crawling along the coast like blind crabs. She'll ride hard in a storm if we don't build her lines right." "Build them right," Yara said. "Timber," the yardmaster insisted, clutching his hat in both hands now as if it were a scroll. "We cannot lay that kind of weight in the bones with what we have." "I've a promise of good oak and elm," Yara said, "and iron fastenings from a smelter who owes me more than he can pay with words. If promise does not arrive close-fisted, we'll take down 2 moored hulks that have rotted into their berths and salvage what will hold nails." "Nendersauer." "Who promised?" "Roderick Harlaw. That eased nothing, but it smoothed the surface of the water. The reader had his own kind of weather among the islanders. His name blew seasoned and salt-sure through places where others' names tumbled." The yardmaster grunted. "Well then," he said, "if the reader has put his ink to it." She left them to their bristling mutters and uncoiled arguments, and walked Black Wind's gangplank in the sleet. The longship lay like a loyal dog at rest, scored with familiar scars. She had fought behind that prow, and slept on that deck. She had bled on it, trimmed sail on it with hands gone numb, kissed a woman beneath its raised stern in a night so black the sea and sky were a single breath. She laid her palm upon the gunwale. "You'll forgive me," she said. Harl's shadow fell beside hers. "The men will grumble. I've known men who grumbled with their mouths full. We'll give them something to eat and watch how they sing." "Ben." "There will be more than grumbling, Captain," he said, and she heard it there. His old name for her slipping into the new. A small shift like changing footing on a wet deck. The difference between one and the other was the difference between surviving and being remembered. "Priests will plant themselves in the surf and ask the god to drown us in our berths. There are captains still swimming in Urin's wake who would rather cut their own throats than sell the sea its own salt. There is Seaguard. Now, Seaguard will have to learn a new bell," she said. "One that rings for purchase, not warning." He was quiet a while, watching the men. "I have no love for cogs, but a deck is a deck. I'll take a ship that minds the wind and answers the rudder. whatever her lines. Only tell me this is a ship we can fight in if we must. If we must, Yara said. And her smile this time was hard enough to take the shape of iron. If we must fight, we'll fight with her weight. We'll give her a lower deck and ore rooms and stone in her belly if she needs to kiss a hull open. We'll hang scorpions in her stern if a lordling gives us cause to remember the old tongue. We will not forget ourselves, Harl. We will only remember the parts worth keeping. Nan? No. At 10 towers, the salt blew straight through the shutters and fretted at parchment until maps curled like leaves left too close to fire. Roderick Harlaw's library smelled of vellum rubbed with walnut oil and of long decanted wine. Yara had never liked the place when she was young, books that looked at you with the suspicion of old men. But she had learned to respect the hunger that drove Roderick to sit among them as if no sea beyond the window had ever tempted him. Watching him at a table scattered with charts and narrow ledgers, and a journeyman scrivener's harried efforts. She thought the reader made war differently, and perhaps better. He had a way of lining foes up until they were numbers, and then taking them apart. You bring me a quarrel, he said without looking up as she came in. Or a hope. Timber, she said. And iron. The yardmaster is already telling the men I've decided to feed their wives off flatbread and pretty promises. Roderick's mouth twitched into a smile. Pretty promises are cheaper than flatbread this winter. But promises do not float. I'm told even your father's promises sank like stones. Praise a man properly and you conjure him, Yara said, going to the table. Look at me, uncle. Roderick lifted his head. His eyes had always been patient and somehow unafraid, as if he had made a study of his own death, and concluded it would not be an interesting book. You have your mother's long hands, he said, and that is 2 compliments at once. What is this timber for? She told him. She told him until the words warmed in her, and the idea rose with the heat of them, as if it truly had lungs. When she was done, the reader had not laughed her away, or pushed the papers at her as if offended. Instead, he rose with a small groan and went to the shelves, fingertips passing over spines that gave under them like living things. He returned with a bound stack tied with cord. The Manderlords, he said softly, untying it. Trade records from Old Town in the days before King Eris took to burning his own. See here, grain from the Reach, wine from the Reach, wine from the Arbor, timber from Black Crown and Red Lake. You will not buy oak from Old Town Yara. The Hightowers count each sapling as if it were a son. But see also the margins. He tapped fine script. Myrish traders paid in broadcloth and dyes, and the whalers at Ibim paid in hides and oil, and those from the 3 sisters paid in salt and wool. They are not generous, but they are regular. I do not want the Reach's wood, Yara said. The Reach wants what grows from wood. Masts, spars, pegs, nails. If I bring them pitch and rope, if I bring them chain, might they not give me what I ask in turn? Then so. They will sell to anyone, Roderick said, but they will not sell to those who frighten them. You will have to bring them something more reliable than broken heads and emptied coffers. I will bring them us, she said, but us with ledgers. The reader's smile deepened. Then let us start our ledgers. You have 3 ships that can be altered without drowning themselves in the change. Name them. Tell me what each can carry if her lines lift. Black Wind, she said. Foam Fang. Grey Kiss. You name them like a hunger. It is a hunger, she said, only half smiling now. Hunger dressed until it can be shown ashore. He wrote. He scratched, his quill tapping the lip of the ink as if it too had a temper and was kept in check by habit. You will go north first, he said eventually. White Harbor. Manderley has always been a man who can count without feeling insulted by numbers. He will pretend he does not know you, and then he will remember he is a traitor whether he likes the company or not. If he hates you, he will be clever enough not to let it appear. If he pretends to love you, you will know to watch his hands. Then, I will go to White Harbor, Yara said, and you will send word to the yards to give me what timber we can spare. Elm for ribs, oak for the keelson, pine for decking. We will lay down rope until the spinner's fingers bleed and boil pitch until the air turns black. I will not be turned aside by a priest knee-deep in the surf." "You will not," Roderick agreed. "But you will let me speak to Aaron. I will not be made to kneel in a tide pool while my hair is baptized with silt." "Nor will I," the reader said dryly. "But I will remind him that traders drown too. That ships with fat bellies float only because someone taught them to. The drowned god does not despise trade. He despises those who drown badly." She laughed outright at that, and for a little while the winter loosened its hold on the room. Outside, gulls screamed at some argument only they understood. The sea breathed and breathed and breathed. Word spread the way it always did on islands. Seam by seam, through baskets of limpets, in the pauses between oar strokes. Yara had not ordered any crier, and yet she found herself answering challenges with her back to the harbor, planks underfoot, the wind wanting to snatch her words. Captains came. Men whose hair had turned the ashy gray of old rope and boys whose mustaches had only lately discovered their faces. Aaron came, beard dripping, eyes so wide it seemed as if he were keeping seawater out through force of glare. She let them have their shout, and then she lifted her hand until the yard fell to the kind of quiet that could be broken by a dropped nail. "You have called me daughter and called me bitch," she said, letting the word sit without flinch, so that the men who had brought it swallowed it back again. "You have called me captain and called me fool. I am both some days. But I am also what your sons call me when they are hungry. They call me the woman who keeps the ships trimmed and the men paid." "The iron price is not paid in silver," called out Christopher Drum, the Red Reaver's son, his scars laddered pale on his cheek. "Pay with coin and you teach boys to beg. Pay with blood when the sea is empty and you teach them to die." Yara answered, "We have paid with blood enough. I will not be the captain of orphans." Aaron lifted his hands. "The sea does not buy," he said, voice low and deep and rolling as if he had swallowed the surf whole. "The sea does not reckon. It takes, it gives, it drowns and it births. It does not haggle. It haggles every day," Yara said. "It haggled with Balin and it won. It haggled with Euron and it laughed. It haggled with Victarion and swallowed his letters. The sea is bargaining us to death. We will bring something to the table besides our bodies. Benda. And you will build merchant tubs," Aaron said, the last word a filth he spat. "I will build ships that carry more than rage," Yara said. "They will be armed if they need to be. They will ride a storm and they will take us farther than any raid has taken us in 100 years. They will bring back coin. Coin can be hammered into nails, into hooks, into knives. Coin can be traded for grain when the ground will not give us any. Coin can be counted, and what you can count you can share." "We share what we take," Christopher insisted, but without the fire of conviction he had hoped to kindle. "We have always shared. We share funerals," Yara said, and her voice slipped lower and sharpened enough to shave something away. "We share our dead like bread. I would like to share bread like bread," they muttered. Men do not like being told their gods are bad bookkeepers. They do not like being told that their dead have been buried foolishly. Yara did not try to make any of it sound finer than it was. She brought out the sacks instead. 3 heavy, mud-streaked things that Harl had dragged here himself from the locked room in the keep. She slit one and poured out coin. The clinking was obscene, the way laughter is obscene at a wake. Silver and copper, a gleam or two of gold. It spilled across the planks and men's eyes went to it as if to a woman stepping from a bath. Yara crouched and turned a piece with her thumb so the stamped falcon rose into sight. "White Harbor," she said. "Paid for chain and tar. Paid honestly after a fat man counted my fingers and my teeth. He never asked if I had drowned and come up harder. He asked what I would bring next and whether I could keep my captains from chewing his docks. I told him I would hang any man who took a stolen spoon into his hall, and I told him I would cut off any hand that reached for a northern child. He laughed, because he did not believe me. I will make him believe me. Then so, White Harbor paid you, Harl said to the men with deliberate casualness. And the reader has sent word that Old Town will pay us for pitch. I like pitch. It takes fire. Menchen. Someone else's fire, Kryn growled. But it was a habit now, a role he could play in his sleep. Seaguard, called up a voice. Will Malister not string us from his gull tower? He will set his archers and sing songs about the day the Ironborn grew soft, Yara said, standing. Then he will buy good fish with his own coin, and he will buy iron nails besides, because even a hater of Ironborn must make his walls hold fast. He will take our coin and he will give us his. He does not need to like me to pay fair at market. Nah. What if he kills you on your own deck? Aeron asked, gentle as skinned kelp. What if he puts an arrow through your heart, or a prayer through your skull? Then you can set a king's moot for the gulls, Yara said. And the laugh that broke from half the throats present was sharp with relief because it had needed a way out. But until then the yard works. We build, we sail, we pay. Then later, when the men had gone to their quarrels and their cups, when the yardmaster had stalked away muttering ship's bones to himself like charms against change, Yara sat alone on Black Wind's stern bench and felt the ship's old ache beneath her hand. Theon came quietly as he had learned to do, his presence a soft rearrangement of air. He settled with care, leaving a respectful space. He was thinner than winter itself, but his eyes had begun to thicken again with something that might have been life. They hate you, he said mildly, as if remarking upon the weather. They hate being hungry more. She said. He nodded. Gaze on the water where the torches threw gold on black. Gold on black. Gold on black. As if some patient hand were laying leaf after leaf. Do you remember the first time Father took us raiding along the stony shore? You were a terror. You tried to steal the boy's helm off his head while he was still wearing it. I wanted it because he did, she said. I wanted what was not mine because we were taught there was no other way to want. Do you remember the house with the red door? He blinked, surprised. I never told you about that. Not yours, she said, mouth quirking. And he went back to watching the water. After a moment he said, I would like to see a door I did not have to break. You will, she said. I will make you knock on doors that open from the inside. Gods help me. I will teach the men how to knock. The refitting began with arguments and prayers, and when those were done, with labor. Black Wind suffered the indignity of her belly opened up and her ribs exposed. Her lines altered under Gela's eye until she looked, if not like a true trader, at least like something that might forgive the weight of a trader's cargo. Foam Fang and Grey Kiss lay in the shed beside her and took on their new bones like prisoners learning new habits. They widened, they deepened, they lay low and glowered through the changes like sullen men at a wedding feast. Yara went among them and laid her hand upon their sides and spoke nonsense into them. A captain's love, inarticulate but stubborn. The yard filled with steam and smoke, and the cries of men scalded by hot pitch, and men who had lost their footing on wet planks. Rope was spun until the spinner's fingertips were blooded red, then wrapped and wrapped to hide the evidence. Nails were hammered and counted, and entered in a ledger that the reader had sent along with a neat little man whose wife, he said earnestly, would beat him bloody if he went back to 10 towers with numbers unsorted. Harl oversaw the arming. If Yara meant to call them merchant ships, he would make certain the word did not mean easy meat. Scorpions were mounted on swivels at stern and bow. Hooks were polished to fine points. Stones to be used as rams were loaded low. Shields were stacked along the gunwales, not in displays to frighten soft-bellied landmen, but in easy reach, where a sudden glitter could rise like a thought turned into a blade. Men trained to hold oars and to let them go when fight came. Men trained to stand in ranks that could shift and not end with iron at the wrong throat. Aeron came again to the yard and stood ankle-deep in the slurry of sawdust and sleet. He said nothing. He lifted his hands finally and spoke a blessing over vessels he believed an insult to his god. The words were the same as those he spoke over skeleton-thin raiders leaving for a coast. They came from a time when men believed a god could be summoned with syllables and held with vows. "What is dead may never die," he intoned, and his voice thickened with a dread he could not prevent. Because it was winter, and the men he blessed looked as much like toilers as like warriors, and everything that was old in him was screaming. Yara bowed her head and let the words go over her hair like water. She had been drowned once with the other captains and come up choking and laughing. She did not feel the god then, and she did not feel the god now. But she felt the sea, and the sea was enough. White Harbor came up out of the winter haze as a bulk of pale stone and exhortation. The merman banners hung damp and stubborn, and the harbor bell tolled once when Black Wind's new lines were sighted, the sound carrying across water cold enough to harden spit into ice. Yara remembered the first time she had come within bowshot of these walls. How the archers had stood and set and lifted their shafts like a forest that bristled only for you. She had laughed then. She did not laugh now. She had Harl show the white knife their bellies, holds stacked like a miser's pantry with smoked fish and tar, with barrels of lamp oil, with coils of rope wound as if a mother had made each one for her own daughter's wedding. She had the men's axes cased and the scorpions hooded. She had Theon stand by the gangway with his empty hands folded in front of him. A prince reduced to nothing, and then to something again, patient and prepared to be humbled. They were brought to the quay in due time. The ropes were thrown and caught as if they had been practicing those throws together for a lifetime. Yara stepped onto stone, and the stone did not rise to meet her in violence. It lay still as a memory. The Lord's men came down in a slow, heavy tide, and behind them came Lord Wyman Manderley himself, immense as rumor, beard salted with meal like a baker's mischief. His eyes were clever and hid their cleverness with blink and smile. "Captain Greyjoy," he said. He had a way of making captain into either an insult or a commendation depending on where he placed his breath. "My Lord Manderley," Yara said, bowing enough to amuse him. "I bring you fish that taste of the sea and lamp oil that burns without smoke." "And do you bring me back my missing sons?" he asked mildly, and his men smiled like men who knew they were supposed to. "I can bring you a price." She said, "If I were a god, I might make the dead undo themselves. I am not a god. I am a captain who has learned to count." "Now, counting is a religion in this place," Lord Wyman said. "We worship by ledger. It is slow and fattening work. Sometimes I believe even the gods count, and then I come to the end of a meal and decide they do not. Come, show me your holds." She took him aboard like a guest she could not afford to insult. He walked softly for a man his size, as if he understood the way ships notice such things. He and Yara descended into the hold, and he tasted what she offered him with his fingers and with his nose. He smelled the pitch and nodded in satisfaction. The nod of a man who had never caulked a hull, but had paid men who had. He dipped his finger in the lamp oil, wiped it on a rag, and lit it with a curious expression writ clear as fire. He tasted the fish with a flick of tongue that a thrall might have mocked and a prince admired, and for a moment she saw the boy he had been, greedy for salted meat, a mouth taught by plenty to be honest about what it wished to be filled with. "How do you keep your men from stealing?" he asked, looking up at the stacked barrels as though they might bite him. "I pay them," she said. "We have shares. We have rules. They are not softer rules than iron. They cut through wrist and throat just the same if they are broken. And what keeps you from stealing? Consequences," she said. "On the sea. On land. In my own head when I lie down to sleep." He turned a coin between finger and thumb and tossed it to Theon without looking to see if Theon caught it. Theon did, surprised out of his ghost's courtesy. "You brought me back one son at least," Wyman said. "He looks like a man who has eaten enough sorrow. Perhaps he will not be hungry for mine. Perhaps he is a good place to start forgiving you." "Then, I did not seek forgiveness," Yara said, and felt the lie of it slide under her tongue. "I sought trade." "You will have both," Lord Wyman said, "or neither. It is a cold season. Men forgive best when their mouths are full. I will buy your fish and your oil and your rope And your pitch? I will pay you in coin and with a letter that tells Old Town you are safe to do business with if you keep your men in check. If one boy goes missing the week your sails vanish from my harbor, the letter becomes a very different letter indeed. Nah. You will have cause to write no such thing, Yara said. He smiled a smile that took his whole face to make. That would be a mercy to my wrist. Come. Eat something I have no need to sell you. In the merman's court the tapestry showed prosperity like a doctrine. Rivers fat with fish. Fields that accepted seed with a grateful luxury, and gave back wheat like a sigh. Yara set her jaw against the way the rooms were built to make a woman from Pike feel small. She ate, and what she ate was good in the way food is good to those who know the names of hunger. She watched Lord Wyman's household, and nothing was wasted in it. Not even pleasantries. His questions were like nets thrown lazily and pulled vigorously at the end when he saw what he had caught. You will go to Seaguard, he said, when the plates had been cleared. You must. It is a test the coast has been teaching itself to give. If Lord Jason does not draw your blood, he may scoff and glance away as if to say he is above such base commerce. Do not be fooled by his pride. He keeps ledgers too, even if he pretends he keeps only eagles. Then see. I will go to Seaguard, she said, thinking already of the tower with the gull atop it, and of the boy Jason had been told since his first bow shot that his job was to watch the sea for evil. She could not change his job. She could only ask him to see a merchant where a raider had been. You will go to Old Town, Wyman continued. They will trust the reader's name, and perhaps, if you are very fortunate, they will trust that my letter does not lie. They are liars there themselves, but not about grain. They have too much of it to make a game of truth. Now, I will go to Old Town. And bravos, he said, almost cheerfully now, because you wish to be insulted and made to feel like a beggar, even when you present coin as honest as any others. They are a sober lot, the bravosi. There is very little room in their heads for the song of a woman who has taken to counting. I will go to Bravos, she said, and you will return to Pike. I will. He smiled again, a tired kindness in it. Bringing bread. She brought bread. Not a miracle, not a flood of it. Not the leather-belted sacks that would turn a village from one story into another, but enough that women closed their eyes when they bit and men made jokes about the way the crust cut their gums, as if pain were a proof of wealth. The old men were suspicious of all gifts, but they counted their suspicions and counted the loaves and found their suspicions lacking. For the first time in a winter of blank sky and long water, the islands smelt of something other than fish and fear. Ovens were fired, and for a week, the air tasted like crust and patience. Kryn spat as he stood by those ovens, and yet Yara saw him take his own small loaf, aside and softly, gently, carry it to his sister's boy. Aaron preached from the surf until his voice was a ragged rope between two poles, but even he had to eat. He broke a piece of bread and had the grace to look miserable while he chewed. Roderick Harlaw sent word of timber delivered and of a letter from Old Town that could be read as encouragement if one read with a generous heart. It was as warm as a taxman's smile and as damning, but it did not close a door. The reader also sent a warning careful as a mapmaker's line. Men who had flown Uran's rag of a banner had taken to the stepstones again, and there they were calling themselves princes and praying, upon any ship past their reach they could bridle. If Yara meant merchant in her mouth, she must mean escort with her hand. There would be no trade if the sea turned to thieves, and if one ironborn became a trader and another a pirate, the world would not bother to learn the difference. She held a moot of captains, not a king's moot, not a thing called to crown a madman or forgiver. She called men she trusted, and some she did not, and she set out rules none of them liked, which seemed to her a fine beginning. Convoys will move under guard, she said. You will take turns on that ugly duty. You will hold your axes for any who try us, but you will not use them upon the men we protect, and you will not ask the ships you guard to pay you a private tax for the privilege of our love. The shares are the shares. They have been written by the reader, and any man who finds fault may present his complaint to him in writing. I recommend that man have a head made to deflect heavy objects. Then, what if a ship in the convoy runs that is not hers to run? Asked a wary islet captain whose name she kept forgetting. What if she tries to slip under? Will we not be made fools? You will catch her if you can, Yara said. If you cannot, and it is because you are bad sailors, you will pay her captain the insult he has given us ×3. Pride is a currency too, and a bad one. Spend it now and then, we will not be bankrupted by it later. Then they will say we are pirates protecting merchants from other pirates. Harl observed, amused. Sprawled with the insolence of a man comfortable in his place. They always said something like that, Yara replied. Let them talk. We will be busy. They were busy. Foamfang set out with 2 light ships as escort and returned with gossip, even better than coin. The men who had been brave enough to sail alongside Ironborn into Old Town's harbor were telling a story in the taverns there about a Greyjoy who had counted, and a Greyjoy who had paid. It would be laughed at, then chewed on as a puzzle, then used as a key in the doors of men who wished to turn locks. Old men dug in their heels and muttered that this was a trick as old as sin. Young men, ambitious as soup, listened and made new soup from the news. The Iron Banks factor in Old Town had piers, and those piers had ink. The next time Yara wrote, she received, along with clipped replies from a man who did not believe in pleasantries, a line that could be read as credit if one were very thirsty. On a morning blown, clean by rain, black wind beat west along the northern coast. Sails fat, mizzen humming. Gulls fell behind them like confetti. Harl had the men change course by a quarter point, and Theon watched his hands on the tiller as if he had never seen a man steer. Men learned to steer again after breaking. They learned to set a course with their detached parts. He had been in pieces once, but now he stood whole enough to do as he was told without cringing, and to suggest when it was proper. He came to Yara's side as Seaguard's gull tower lifted from the horizon. They remember me here, he said, the words flat but not lifeless. They remember us everywhere, she said. We will not trade in places that have not heard our names. Such places are dangerous for fools, and we are making ourselves into a different kind of fool. At the first sight of Black Wind's iron kraken, the harbor stirred. Bells did not ring, but men appeared, and of a sudden the air had the tension of bowstrings in it. Yara ordered the scorpions to remain hooded, and she had the shield stacks covered with a tarp that did not pretend to be anything but canvas. She dressed her men plain. She went ashore with Harl and Theon and no more. The town was much as she remembered it. Fishing boats pulled up like old men drawn closer to fire, and the great tower, the gull above, glowering like a thing that was tired of whiteness and had chosen to be gray. Lord Jason Mallister awaited them at the head of his guard. He was handsome still, the kind of handsomeness that annoys men because it does not seem to have been purchased at high price. He wore a lighter mail than his father would have strapped on, and the man's bearing was a lesson in how to stand without making your spine a spear. Captain Greyjoy, he said with equal parts distaste and duty, as if he had bitten a fruit that was both ripe and spoiled. My lord, Yara said, I am selling fish and lamp oil and tar and rope. I will have coin. Bess. You will have my rope around your neck if one man is missing from my docks when you cast off. Jason Mallister said, and his men nodded in absolute agreement, fearless behind a leader who had never taught them how to doubt him. I have men on my deck who have tied more knots than the rope you promised could ever boast, Yara said. But I'm not here to test your knots. You are not here at all, he said. And yet, here you stand. I stand here because the world is melting, Yara replied, soft as a woman sharing a secret. Because winter eats and does not spit out bones. Because you may hate me, and that as well. But do not let your harbor hate the coin it needs to weather the season. All this philosophy for fish, he said with a not unpleasant curl to his mouth, like a man who has smelled something interesting and refuses to ask what it is for pride. And oil, Yara said, clean burning. Your wife's tapestries will bless you, and your men will not cough their lungs up in the night. Show me, he said curtly. She did. He minded her, like a boy told to hold out his hands for a lady's whipping. Jaw tight. He poked. He sniffed. He was no gourmand, but he was a lord whose hall had learned already to calculate the cost of a candle that smoked. He took up a coin and flipped it, clean, precise. He did not smile when he made his purchases, but he did not scowl either. He signed a chit with a swift impatience, handed it to a man whose job it was to turn the world's promises into what would feed seaguards' bellies, and he met Yara's gaze. "If one boy goes missing," he said, voice mild as a prayer, "I will hang you upside down from the gull and let you watch the tide come in." "If one boy goes missing," she said, "tell me, and I will find the man responsible and hang him from your gull with my own hands. I have axes enough for both our throats." He nodded, and she understood then that he was not a man who gave his trust, but a man who placed his conditions like stones across a river. She had stepped onto the first and her feet were wet, and the water was cold. But she had begun. After, as they sat on the deck and counted quietly with the reader's mild factor, Theon said, "You lied to him?" "Did I? If a boy goes missing, then what?" He was not pushing. He was seeking the structure of a promise as if it were the edge of a knife he might have to hold. "I will hunt the man," Yara said. "If he is ours, I will cut him loose from us, and everyone will see the rope snap. If he is not ours, I will tell Lord Jason that I am not his net. And then I will break the head of any man who tries to make me one." Men shot. "And if the boy goes missing because the boy runs, then we have learned another kind of trade," she said, after a long breath. "And we will ask what price a man's fear is and who is paying it. I want no runaways whose chains we forged. That is a kind of iron I am willing to break." The stepstones were a hum of rumor, even when the wind blew no one that way. Every harbor whispered about them. Little islands that made a poor man rich with wrecks and turned rich men into fish. It was inevitable that someone would go there with Yara's name in his mouth and mispronounce it as prey. Foam Fang's captain came back with 2 holes in his hull just above the waterline, and a story about black-sailed bastards flying a banner of a black raven with 1 red eye. It was no banner she knew, but the sea had more sigils than gods. Harl showed her the holes, as if showing her wounds carved into his own ribs. They came fast in a narrow cut between island and rock, he said, a hand sweeping along the planks. "We could not turn without scouring our belly and losing the convoy. We held, we fought, we bloodied them until their hunger went dull, and then we ran. The convoy made Old Town's roadstead with 1 squealing mast, but they made it." "Nay, you did right," Yara said. "And now we will go and teach them that merchant convoys are not to be gnawed. You want to go to war? I want to go to trade," she said. "But even a market has rules, and a man who pisses on the scale has his head put through it." They went. She chose Black Wind because she wanted the old speed under her in case they needed it, and because the ship would forgive her if she bled on her again. She took Foam Fang, patched and new-ribbed, because ships learn from pain. She took 3 long ships that had not yet been altered, and 2 low, ugly things that had been sketched out by Jella in the cold, and built in a fury of pride, with high noses and a grotesque aft that laughed at weather. Harl wrinkled his nose at them, and then nodded as a man nods to a woman he has not liked, and then has found himself kissing. They were not pretty, but they had a bite. The stepstones did not show themselves elegantly. They rose from the sea as if someone had thrown a handful of broken teeth into a basin, and then decided they were an archipelago. Currents turned lazy, and then treacherous. The wind behaved like a drunk. Yara watched the water and let its colors tell her truths. The scatter of white where it thinned over a rock just below the surface. The odd calm that meant a stilled eddy fat with one sort of danger or another. She slowed, and their shadows slowed with them. Men with scars that had never seen salt appeared on the decks of the black-sailed ships, and shouted clever things about krakens gone soft. Jella's ugly ships grinned back with their wooden mouths, and the scorpions were unhooded. When the first bolt sank into the Raven banner's sail and collapsed it like a chest punched of its breath, Yara felt no glory. There was satisfaction of a cold variety in doing the work right, in holding a curve as you should, and not letting the stern slide out from under you when you could feel the sea wanting it. She did not believe in clean fights. There is nothing clean about tearing wood. There's nothing clean about watching a man go overboard and trusting that the sea will be far more merciful than you have been, simply because she is larger than you. They left 2 ships burning between rocks that had made funerals of men more honest than either crew. The Raven Banner's captain shouted promises from a splintered deck, while his men threw their oars into water, as if they could push the world away from them. Yara kept her scorpions hooded after the initial flurry, and let the Ironborn shape the fight with axes and hooks. It mattered. It mattered that the men who would later boast in taverns about the day they had defended trade had done so with their hands, and not with the distance of bolts. It mattered to Yara more than she could say. Stories had to be crafted carefully so they did not turn and bite you. After, in the narrow lee of a friendly ledge, she counted her men. 2 dead. Harl's hair had been singed back on one side, so that he looked, for the moment, like a boy. Theon had a cut along his forearm he had tied with a strip of sail. He touched the wound as if pleasantly surprised to find himself still a creature that bled red. "You did not chase them," he said. "You could have run them into that channel and stacked their hulls like cordwood." "I do not want cordwood," she said. "I want something that grows back." She escorted the convoy through the cut, tolerating the insults thrown from the island's shore like coins tossed at the wrong bride. Men were men. They shouted, and then they went home. Gulls settled upon the quiet water like the return to sense. She lay down that night, with her back to Black Wind's planks, and listened to the sea make a story she might have believed if she were less practiced. Letters went ahead of her. They rode the hands of men who moved more quickly than ships, and just as determinedly. By the time she went up the harbor of the Whispering Sound and walked under Old Town's shadow, the Hightower's eyes had already turned toward the sea with a telescope's cold interest. Lord Leighton Hightower did not meet with her. It would have been too strange, and the world never woke and did the strangest thing first. Instead, his factor met her. A man who gave his name as Benifer, and whose hair was powdered in a way that made Yara want to clap him on the shoulder to see if dust would rise. "You have a letter," Benifer said, barely concealing the distaste in his tone when he realized the letter from White Harbor said good things about an Ironborn captain rather than bad. "You have goods." "I have a ship that does not leak," Yara said. "You will like that better than you like my voice." He liked it well enough. Tar is tar, and rope is rope, and lamp oil burns without smoke or it does not. If the items match their names, a man with ledgers will buy rather than waste a winter sniffing. Old Town bought, and the coins in Yara's palm did not seem to hold as much as she had thought they might. She hired a few men to carry the metal to her hold, because it pleased her to see Old Town's men work upon a ship under the Kraken. They did their task with good humor, and none of them made the sign against evil when she turned her head. Braavos was less kind. The Titan roared out his stone defiance as she passed under, his eyes lit by night with the angry gods of men who did not believe in gods, but in judicious arrangements of shade and illumination. The harbor master had her anchor in the roadstead for a day and a night, as if hoping she would make insult enough to be sent away. She did not. She sat on her deck and played at knucklebones with Theon, and let the men eat soup until it made them sweat. When the harbor master finally came in a glaze of politeness, Yara gave him the neatest bow of her life, and pretended very well to be a different woman than the one who had held a blade at the throat of a bannerman on a coast road not 4 years past. Braavos has long memories and short patience, but it has a price for both. The Iron Bank's factor was as thin and carefully balanced as a sword. He had no interest in stories except as they were converted into risk and measurements of loss. Yara did not tell him the truth about her motives, because motives had no exchange rate. She told him her ship's capacities and their routes, and the shape of the convoys, and the escort schedule. He asked twice as many questions as a good host would ask, and offered a ledger line with less generosity than a gullpex at a corpse. "You will fail and undo yourself," the factor said pleasantly, "or you will succeed and become moderate. We have had good experience with both types." "You talk as if men are coin," she said. "They are," he said, eyes alight with the pleasure of condescension performed well. "You simply need to learn the denominations." She left Braavos with her jaw sore from clenching it, and with letters that meant she could tell a yardmaster that iron would be paid for, on time. She had not sold the sea for that. She had sold some portion of her pride, not the worst bargain she had made. When she came home, the island smelt stronger of bread than they had when she had left. The ovens had sullenly continued to be stoked. Men frowned and paid for their purchases, and then laughed later in their cooksheds. The priests prayed. The reader wrote. The children grew. Yara slept. In her sleeping, she dreamed of a door with red paint, and when she woke, she was annoyed as if someone had stolen a thing that was not hers. She had not earned such a dream. She had earned the ache in her shoulders and the taste of smoked fish that would not be driven from her mouth even with wine. She went to the parapet above the great keep and stared at the sea again, and the sea stared back without blinking. The gulls wheeled. The ropes creaked. Somewhere a man swore at a nail that would not go in, and then laughed as if he had told the nail a joke, and the nail had at last been charmed. Harl joined her, his hair uneven as the grazing on a steep slope. "We will have trouble from Christopher Drum," he said without greeting. "He's gone taking men back to Old Wyke, young ones, the sort who have not learned to enjoy eating. Let him make his sermon," Yara said. "He will not preach with wet hair. He will come with axes." "Axes are not prayers," Yara said. "Axes argue though, and we must be ready to argue back." Theon came later with a paper in his hand, frowning at it as if it were a rare fish that might bite. "From Roderick," he said, offering it. "Ships have been sighted off Fair Isle. Not ours. Not Lannister. He wonders whether we can spare a pair to go look." "We can spare," Yara said, "because we have built. We can spare because not every ship must be a raider to be worth its keep, and not every sailor must be a murderer to be a man of the islands. We will send 2. We will send them with goods that pass for gifts until the men at Fair Isle realize they are being insulted by being paid." Theon stared at her for a long moment, then smiled with something like the earliest, scarcest shard of the boy he had been sliding through. "You sound like a woman who enjoys counting." "I enjoy it when the numbers say children will not die," she said, and the words did not embarrass her, though long ago they might have. There were letters piled upon letters and ledgers upon ledgers and captains, to bridle and priests to appease without letting them take the reins. There were angry men whose fathers had fallen on Northman blades, and proud boys whose mouths were too eager to say they would die for an old song. There were dock fees and bribes and honest payments, and the slow drift of coin out and trickle of coin back. There were nights when Yara stood on Black Wind's deck with no comfort but the knowledge that comfort had never been her portion, and she felt not hollow but useful, in the way a tool feels when it is well fitted to a hand. The days bent like oar strokes and the weeks bore her forward. Roderick Harlaw came to Pike with his fingers stained with ink and a smile he had not meant to wear. "I have been reading," he said, the words rich with amusement, "about the Grey Irons in the days before the Old Way was named. They traded amber and whetstones to the north and took in return pretty boys with their ears pierced and women who could weave a blanket tighter than a quarrel. They called it writing because it pleased them to believe they were stealing what the North was too foolish to keep. But when the North grew tiresome, they wrote down obligations on the back of old maps. They forgot to make a religion of it. They were practical. It seems we have not invented any new sin. Now, practicality is an old vice," Yara said. "If the priests do not like it, they can hold their breath longer. Do not dare them," Roderick said, laughter like a small private fire. Then his face softened. "You are doing it, niece. I am doing it," she said, and felt the fear that always followed success like a small sharp fish in her belly. "Now I must keep doing it." "You will be attacked," Roderick said. "You will be betrayed. You will be told that numbers lack poetry, and that your ships have lost their teeth, and that a woman who counts cannot also bleed. You will be told that a god who drowns cannot read. You will be told many things, and you will go on. Bentrau, I will go on," she said, because there was nothing else. Night came early and spread out as if it had an appointment and meant to be on time. Sleet hissed. In the grate, keep a brazier puffed, and the smoke grudged its way up the flue. Yara sat with Theon and Harl and Roderick and the little neat man who kept the ledgers, and the pieces on the table were not chessmen, but carved ships with pegs for cargo and small slotted boards that could be filled with stones to show the weight of a hold. Roderick's hand moved from one to another with an old man's care that disguised a prowler's hunger. Theon placed a pebble in Black Wind's belly and said, without looking up, "I think I know how to add without weeping now." "Then the gods forgive us both," Yara said. She went to bed late and slept the sleep of the mainsail dropped clean after a long thrumming wind, sudden, heavy, absolute. In the morning, bells. Not the long outrage of sea guards' cry, and not the confident peal Old Town made when a prince put in. Lord Sport's bells, not warning and not welcome, but work. She rose and dressed and went down, and the sea had been busy in the night as it always was. A skiff had come in with a girl who had stolen her father's oar and rowed up the black throat of the harbor looking for Yara Greyjoy. She was tall, and her hair was tangled with dried salt, and she looked older than hunger. "I am Hala," she said, lifting her chin to prove it. "From Old Wyke. Christopher Drum has taken 24 boys, and the promise of more, and I am not a boy. I am faster than any of them, and I will work harder, and I will not make a song into a god. Take me." Nemsipshan. Yara exchanged a glance with Harl. He shrugged, which in him was equivalent to a bow. Theon looked everywhere but at Hala, as if eye contact were a contract that could be enforced by law, strange and binding. The priests would drown her if they could, and declare her born anew enough to be a salt wife by nightfall if she failed the test without dying. Yara felt the place in her chest where her father's belief had once sat like a stone, and found it softened by bread. "You will sweep and coil and count, and you will learn the lines," she said to the girl. And the girl's face did not change because she had expected to be told to lick the deck clean, if she meant to stand upon it. "If you touch a man's knife without his say, I will break your fingers. If you steal from the hold, I will give you to Aaron, and he will drown you in a bucket because he is kind. If you work, you will eat." "I will work," Hala said. "You will eat," Yara said. She watched the girl go aboard and find her beam among the rest. There was pride in it, and there was terror. Because you cannot turn a fleet by yourself. You turn it by letting 100 small hands find a new habit and keep it. The sea kept insisting upon difficulties. The Raven banner men in the stepstones rearranged themselves under a different black rag and tried again. Lords with memories reached like arrows at her convoys, testing what could be taken and made to look like duty. Aaron seemed always to be in her way without ever finding his way into her house. His prayers had become as persistent as a leaking seam. There were days when the numbers did not add up, when a man who ought to have lived died and a ship that ought to have held took water like a drunk. When a child took ill because the bread had grown old in 3 days' time, and the mother had not known she needed to cut off the first inch to keep the rest from going sour. There were nights when she had to put her fist through a table, because the wood was an enemy that would not bleed, and she needed an enemy that did not bleed. Then morning came, and with it ropes and pegs, and a man shouting for a tally, and she was saved again by work. Roderick sent her a slim book full of the thinnest ink he could find. The script inside was not poetry, but it turned and glinted like a fish fast in a net. It was a list of men and women who had once traded, and what they had traded, and what was owed, and by whom. Yara read it until the lines wrote themselves on the backs of her eyelids. She found a woman in Old Town who had sold coarse linen until her hands were rougher than the cloth, and whose son dreamed of ships. She found a blacksmith in Torrhen Square who remembered a Greyjoy who had not been a monster, and thought perhaps there were 2 such anomalies in the world. She found a brave O.C. with a laugh that made the Iron Bank's factor start and glance, embarrassed, in his direction, as if he had farted in a temple. She began to know who believed what their mouths said, and who was using the words as a rig. She ate bread every afternoon, just a heel of it, whether or not she was hungry. She said to herself, in a voice like her father's when he was not being theatrical, that a loaf was a better measure than a song, and a child's full belly a truer verse than any priest had intoned. She did not become softer. She became something else. On a gray day with a light snow like thrown flour, Yara stood again upon the parapet and watched the fleet. Her fleet, being herded from the yard to the water like cattle made into ships. They were not beautiful in the way longships are beautiful, when they lift and cut and leap. They were heavy, lines fattened to hold a longer breath. They would go farther with a fair wind and go slower without one. They would forgive mistakes that longships punished. She loved them a little despite herself and because of what they might do. Behind her, the steps scuffed and then paused. She knew the beat of that halt. Aaron stood with his hair dripping its sermon. "You make us into butchers," he said softly. "Putting meat in mouths does not make men men. It makes them animals. I make them butchers because they have eaten themselves for too long," Yara said. "This is a soft winter. Do you not hear it breathing? I hear it breathing like a big thing asking to be fed." "Damned." "The sea asks to be fed," Aaron said. "Not with coin. With return," Yara said. "With returning. With coming home. What is dead may never die," Aaron said. "You cannot resurrect men by giving them jobs. Only the God can do that." "I am not trying to resurrect them," Yara said, and her voice was tender against the cold. "I am trying to keep them from dying." Aaron's hands fell, a small back down. He looked older than he had when the winter began. Men who loved impossible things always aged badly when the world refused to give them their miracle. He did not bless her. He did not curse her. He stepped back into the stairwell, and the sea-wet darkness in it received him. Harl came to her side and did not try to be wise. Theon came with 2 cups of wine and held one out, and she took it and let the warmth spread along her thumb and through her palm and up her wrist. The fleet took the tide with awkwardness and with will. Sails lifted. Men shouted. The sound was a hymn different from any she had learned as a girl. She listened, and then she looked at the sea as if she could dare it to disapprove. "I think," she said, with a calm that surprised her as water surprises a man who had not expected it to be clean, "that we will make a merchant out of a kraken yet." Hey. Snow peeled from the parapet as the tide turned, delicate curls of white loosening like sailcloth unhitched from its cleat. The wind had a sound of secrecy to it after a storm, low and intent, slipping along the stone with the care of a thief. Yara stood until her cheeks lost feeling and only then left the wall for the stair. Below, the yard's hammers persisted, as if they believed noise alone could hold off famine. Harl was already at the foot of the stair with a strip of parchment in his hand and a strip of salted eel between his teeth. "From White Harbor," he said, offering her the letter first as if letters nourished more than eel. The wax bore the merman. Yara cracked it with her thumb. Lord Wyman's script marched steady as a tide that had never heard of panic. He thanked her for punctual delivery and for the humor shown by her men when a Manderley boy had tried to swap a copper for a silver with the speed of a conjurer. "And I thank you for the boy's swift correction," the line read, dry as rope, which kept his fingers attached and my reputation for justice secure. He would purchase again lamp oil, tar, rope, smoked cod, and dried whiting. He would recommend her ships to Old Town by a second letter of less warmth and more weight. "Do not mistake this token of trust," he wrote, "for an invitation to raid. I will measure my temper and my barrels with equal care." At the bottom, a scribe had added in a fainter hand, "There is talk in the taverns that the Ironborn have taught their wives to count. If this is true, the world is not ending. It is simply changing weather." "Good," Yara said, folding the letter along its old crease, as if making a valley in it might make the valley in her belly shallower. "He bought us for another tide." Harl tore the eel with his back teeth. "The reader's man says Old Town paid as promised." Sigard's chit turned to coin without a priest needed. "And," he shifted his weight the way men do when they bring news that stinks a little, no matter how you hold it. "Old Wyke. Christopher. Axes or words. Words with axes laid beside them." Yara tucked the letter into her belt, as other captains tuck knives. "We'll see to him before he decides the sea answers to his voice." She saw first to bread. The market that morning in Lordsport looked like a place that had been told it might survive and did not yet trust the telling. Stalls showed their teeth grudgingly, baskets with their lids pried up, bolts of rough cloth unrolled to reveal their coarseness, strings of dried river fish that gave up their perfume without enthusiasm. Yara stepped through with her hands behind her back, as if she feared her fingers might steal. Men marked her and whispered, and then spoke more plainly in hope that she would hear their cleverness. She heard everything and nothing. Noise slid off her where a blade would stick. They found the thief by the smell of lamp oil. He had forced a bung and spilled 2 good quarts in panic, slopping the dock with the slick of it, and now stood with his hands lacquered and his eyes skating from face to face. He was theirs. There was a knot of Kraken tattoo on his arm the color of healed plum. Yara did not speak at first. She knelt and laid a finger in the oil, then rubbed thumb to forefinger until the skin squeaked and went clean. The man swallowed audibly. "How much?" she asked quietly. "Did you think 1 bung would buy you?" "Only a taste," he said, and it was the truth. "My wife." "Your wife can drink water," Yara said. "She can drink soup. She cannot drink lamp oil unless she means to light herself from the inside and give us all a brighter market." A circles of faces closed and opened like a gill. She did not look to Aaron. He was not here. The market had its own god, and it demanded spectacle. But Yara had learned to be a miser of spectacle the way she was a miser of coin. She took the man's right hand and raised it. He flinched. He knew what the old punishment called for. She did not draw her knife. She turned his wrist and pressed his palm to the wet plank with the gentleness of a nurse settling an infant. "Harl," she said. Harl lifted the lance bucket, heavy with brackish water, and set it down. "You waste good brine on him." Someone called, but the someone sounded almost relieved. "Everyone will see what happens," Yara said, and her voice was calm enough to quiet a gull. She took a length of coarse salt, pink with blood from the last butcher's work, and handed it to the man. He stared at it stupidly. "Rub," she said. He obeyed like a man condemned in a new way. The salt hissed and the oil broke, and the slick came off his skin in rolls. He cried without sobs, water leaking, mouth firm. When he was done, she took the empty bung in her other hand and put it in his fist. "You will work the dock until your hands blister," she said. "You will ladle oil into every lamp for a week, and you will carry a bucket under your arm. And when men ask why you carry a bucket, you will say, 'Because I learned to hold what I am given.' If you drop so much as a spoon of the sea's light, Harl will take your wrist. If you do not, I will pay you your share, as if you had not tried to steal me blind in daylight. That is our law now. It is ugly. It eats. It does not forget." And now, there was grumbling, as always. It had its own economy. There was a breath of something else beneath it, like an undertow. Men will forgive a lesser pain when they have braced for a worse. Theon came up beside her with 2 small loaves tucked under his arm, their crusts so brown the air around them felt warmer. He did not look at the thief. He looked at Yara with a half-smile like a man remembering the structure of teeth from the way bread cuts the mouth. "They'll say you grow soft," he said. "They have said worse," she replied. "They have said die, and I did not." He broke 1 loaf and handed her half. She did not thank him. They ate, and crumbs fell like snow onto the oil-dark plank where the man continued to rub. Old wick smelled of kelp, cured into doctrine, and seal fat boiled down into persistence. The bones of Naga curled on the hill in their permanent grimace, white in winter's flattened light. Men stood between ribs and shouted into a wind that made a mockery of all throats. Aaron had planted himself like a pole and tied his sermons to himself with ropes of callus. The boys around him had the bluer look of those who die well in other men's stories. Christopher waited lower on the slope where the wind blew less, his scars pale like brittle birch. The Red Reaver's son, they called him, though they called every man on Old Wick a son of something bloody. He had 3 axes and a smile, and the comfortable posture of a man who believes he is unassailable, not because of his god, but because of his friends. "You came?" he said, as if complimenting her, as if greeting a fish who leapt willingly into a pan. "I come where I am summoned if the caller owns a ship and a voice," Yara said. "Otherwise I go where I please." You shame us, he said, smile not moving. You bring coin for pride and bread for song. You build bellies where we build boats. Da. I build boats too, Yara said, and let her gaze slide past him to the low sheds, where ropes lay like sleeping snakes. Better ones. Aaron's voice rose. She brings a market into the surf, he cried, hair dripping, hands wide. She brings scales and measures, and says, let us weigh the sea and sell it. I bring nets, Yara said to him without looking up. They catch. She looked back at Christopher. If you have an argument, use words. If you have a quarrel, use axes. But if you mean to steal boys, understand me. I will ship you to the sisters and sell you to a woman with a temper. Daddy. He laughed, then properly, shoulders in it. You think to frighten me with Sisterton? I've warmed my feet on worse. A knot of the boys around Aaron made a small sound. Fear or eagerness. Any sound made in a group is easily mistaken. Hala stood at the edge of them, not with the boys, but not with Yara either. A piece of shore caught between tides. Her hair wore dried salt like jewelry. She met Yara's eye and did not look aside. It was a hard thing she did. A girl on Old Wick accepting that all eyes upon her made her a scandal whether she stood or ran. Yara nodded, which a man would have mistaken for nothing, and Hala took for permission to breathe again. Take 3 of your men, Yara said to Christopher, and the crowd wavered in confusion as if she had struck it with a dull weapon. Bring them into the shed with me. Bring your tongue as well as your axes. We'll make a bargain with our hands where the wind cannot make unintentional priests of us. Then, he considered her the way a gambler considers a die that seems to be smiling. He did not fear a trap. Traps are for men who do not like surprises. Christopher liked surprises provided he could claim them later as his own. He gestured to 2 men with the drum look. Eyes too bright, mouths content to be cruel when asked, and to a third with the tattoo of a squid wreathed around the inside of his wrist. Harl met them at the shed door with a glance that made a taller barrier than timber. Inside, sawdust damped the sound of pride. Ships tried on new bones in here, and that work demanded quiet. Yara did not sit. She placed a ledger on a barrel and let its spine speak when it hit wood. Christopher looked at it as if it might bite. That was a start. You want boys, she said. I will give you men. Boys become men, he said, as if instructing a child in the nature of days. Not if they drown first, Yara replied evenly. Not if they starve while you teach them to sing. Harl leaned against a beam with his arms folded. He did not try to look menacing. He only made it clear you would have to move him to get a knife where it wanted to go. We will escort, Yara said. You will have ships enough. You will stand at the prow and remember the part of you that likes the taste of iron in your mouth. You will guard men who do not deserve guarding. In return, you will eat. You will take coin with the same hand that used to take what you were raised to call the price. If one of yours touches a merchant's daughter without her father's permission, I will gut him and string his intestines from Naga's teeth for gulls. Man, you demote me into a dog, Christopher said. I do not wear collars well. You demote yourself by stealing, Yara said. I offer a rope, not a collar. It's longer. One of Christopher's men shifted, a half step, the restless tell of a hand that wished to be filled and only knew one kind of comfort. Harl didn't change shape. His eyes watched. Yara felt the beam behind her ribs and wanted it nearer. Christopher's smile turned the smallest fraction. He had wanted to come hammering into Pike later and make himself a legend by forcing Yara to hang him in front of a crowd. He had wanted martyrdom with a song to it. She was giving him the awkwardness of employment. It is hard to be sanctified with a wage in your hand. You will make me nursemaids to fat men, he said. My father's father would piss in your ear and call the sound a blessing. Your father's father would piss in the wind and call the spray good news, Yara said. He didn't have to keep men from eating one another when the ice held the river. You threaten me with weather, he said. I threaten you with hunger, she answered. It is the sea's sharper cousin. Silence had weight in the shed. Sawdust drank it. Outside, Aaron's voice rose and fell like a bad tide. Finally, Christopher lifted one shoulder. I will take your rope, he said. I'll wrap it around my hand and pull, and when it cuts, I'll show you the blood and laugh. Laugh, Yara said, but you will not cut it with a knife of your own. He left with insults in a pocket and a plan in his mouth. Aaron looked like a man who had been asked to bless a market stall of sin. Hala watched Christopher go, and then she moved toward Yara with the instinct of a creature that has finally chosen a shore. I work, she said simply. You work, Yara said, and Hala smiled with her eyes, not her mouth. A storm came in off the west, so directly that even the gulls misjudged it. It unrolled, like a scroll that had been bound too long, and in its first unfurling cracked men's ears. Black wind went out in it because she had been born to such weather, and because Jella had argued that the new bellies would show their virtue or their deceit in a gale. There's no telling in calm water, the shipwright said, wind tugging her words to pieces. A fat man can sit still without falling. Make him run. They ran, and the storm ran with them. The sea ridges broke and spun, white like the teeth of beasts. Yara stood at the quarter and kept her knees loose, letting the decks pitch ride through her rather than buck her. Harl had the tiller and Theon the men, and Hala at the forward lashings with 3 sailors twice her age. Her hair braided close and weighted with bits of lead. The first wave that came over made the men shout as if someone had remembered a joke at the worst possible time. The second had them quiet and working. Jella's fuller bows cut differently than a raider's. They lifted where a longship dove, and dove where a longship would have lifted. It was like trying to dance with a woman whose steps were known and yet altered by weight. She had not carried the last time she'd been pressed to you. The boards groaned. The rigging sang. The green-black lip of water curled and smashed along the windward side, like a hand decided on murder and changing its mind in the act. Twice Black Wind's stern threw up while her nose punched. Twice Harl coaxed her through by the courtesy of long practice and by a spit of luck that he refused to name. The convoy behind held, less neatly, but held. Foam Fang showed her scar where patched planks took on water and gave it back. Jella's ugly ducklings chewed the waves and seemed to like the taste of their cruelty. Men were washed and broke their ribs or only their pride. Men cursed and sang and tied what had come untied with fingers heavy as hammered pewter. In the middle of it Hala slipped, and Theon's hand closed on the back of her belt with a swiftness that surprised them both. And she spat the storm out and went back to her lashings as if the sea had tried an honest thing and failed. When it ended lazily, as if it had grown bored with malice. The clouds thinned as though passed through a sieve. The moon found its tools and set to work silvering the mess. Yara counted again and again. Counting is a prayer when you have taught yourself no other. At dawn she went to Jella, where the shipwright crouched with her ear to a seam, listening as if the ship had gossip. She held, Yara said. Jella's mouth went sideways. She changed, she said. That matters more. In Seaguard, the gull on its tower wore 2 inches of snow, as if trying on a new hat and finding it too cold to be fashion. Lord Jason received Yara in the hall with fewer men than last time, which is a courtesy among those who fight for a living. Theon stood beside her, his sleeve hiding the pale seam Hala's belt had left in his skin. Servants carried in a tray of candles that did not smoke and set them down with the care of men used to being watched. One of my boys went missing, Jason Mallister said without any pleasantry to soften the arrow. 2 nights after your ships left. He had too much coin in his pocket for a boy who scrubbed salt off decks. What did he buy? Yara asked. Jason blinked. Faint surprise, faint annoyance. A knife, he said. From whom? A butcher's son too lazy to learn his father's trade. Where is the butcher's son now? In a cell, embarrassed, Jason said. And the boy? In a cell, chastened, Jason said, his mouth a line. We're not the North. If you imagine we cut ears from children because they practice being men badly, you're misinformed. But I have a tower whose name, as you might have heard, is Gull. If I look at it and see you there, I am reminded to be cautious. You saw our sails and felt your father's ghosts rise up to strangle you with reminders to be a good son, Yara said. I cannot argue with your father's ghosts, But the boy bought a knife with the money he earned from work we paid for openly. He scarred your peace with a sharp piece of metal, and with his own idea of himself. I can keep my men from lifting knives that are not theirs. I cannot keep your boys from wanting to be wolves. That is your work. He studied her. There was a fence available to him, but he did not spend it. You will be pains to me, he said eventually, almost with appreciation. The way a man says, I have met a worthy enemy, and I must not allow him to become a friend, and I will be pains to you. Then let us not pretend otherwise, Yara said. Let us be useful pains. He paid her. He showed her the gal where the two boys sat under blanket and sulk, and Theon looked at them as if seeing two versions of himself, both rejected, both loved too late. On the quay, he said quietly, You play at not caring about approval. You care about not being despised. I care about bread, Yara said. And coin. And not the feeling in a hall when you walk in with your hands empty or full. You cannot trade with a man who spits when you step through his door. Ben? You can, Theon said, a humorless smile cutting across his face. You just have to wait until he is thirsty. In the stepstones, men had adjusted their banners to suit a different angle of the wind. The raven had been replaced by a painted rook with one eye picked out in silver. He was called One-Eyed Quirrell in the taverns of Tyrosh, and called something less printable by captains who resented the way he knew the water, as one knows a wife's back with the lights out. He had a habit of letting you believe there was a hole in his line, and then teaching you there was a reef there instead. Yara set her convoy as bait, and went in with an innocence that anyone who had sailed with her would have distrusted. She hung laundry from the stern of the fattest hull, white as surrender, and she had Harl sit on the rail and dangle his legs, a boy with a stick fishing for whales. The escorts drowsed with their scorpions hooded, men asleep, men pissing, men scratching with theatrical propriety. Theon faked a yawn a lordling would have applauded. Quirrell came, scenting meat. His ships looked hungry and light. He had stripped them of any virtue save speed and malice. They could not carry a cargo if their lives depended on it, and so they depended on other men's lives. Yara let him come. She waited until the rook's beak was almost at her barrel before she lifted her hand. Harl's leg jerked up, the signal hidden in a boy's indolence. The hooded scorpions were not scorpions at all but spare booms, rigged high so the first rank of Quirrell's narrow babies speared themselves on wood and canvas raised from the deck like teeth. Foamfang heeled and took the rook's ship across the throat of her bow as if offering a kiss, and then Jella's ugly duckling showed what its great mouth had been built to do. An iron-sheathed jaw hinged from the prow slammed down as if the ship had grown carnivorous. It bit the rook's deck where men had been laughing, and left them nowhere to stand but the truth. It was vicious. It was quick. It was not pretty, and Yara did not seek prettiness. She let the men take some few of Quirrell's crew alive, and ordered them loosed in sight of two fat Lyseni wine cogs crossing the gray distance toward Mire. Sailors talk. Sailors will tell you what they saw, even when telling makes their own ship smaller. Let them call her a kraken turned merchant. Let them say she had teeth after all. On Pike. The weather went mean in a new way. Not large storms, but a spitefulness to wind that made sails want to tear along their seam just to prove they were still cloth. The ovens never went cool now. Children had learned to say, crust, with reverence. Jella's sheds worked like lungs, pulling in raw timber and exhaling ship. The reader moved among ledgers without coughing, though the smoke and pitch should have taken him. He sent Yara a charter with annotations like the keepings of a man who had courted an idea and wanted it seen in public at last. A free dock, it proposed, in Lordsport, exempt from certain levies for ships, bearing a mark stamped by Yara's own factor. A kraken's eye within a ring. The rules were simple like slaps. No stolen children, no stolen women, no stolen spoons. Arms to be peace-tied and peace-teed. Arms to be all too easily untied should 3 bells ring together from the quay. A weighman to be chosen by lot every week from among unallied captains. A tithe to the reader's library, of ink or of coin. A tithe to Aaron's pond of eel or of blood from a finger. A suits the man. Yara almost laughed at that last, and then she did laugh. because the world was larger than old men's prayers and smaller than a woman's hunger, and sometimes, when both laid down their complaints in the same book, a third thing could be made. She took the charter to Aaron as if she were carrying something alive and dangerous. He stood in his usual place, water nibbling his toes. She let him read, and he moved his lips because the letters did not sing, and so he helped them along. "You make a god of ink," he said. "No," Yara said. "I make a bit of ink for a god to push against if he wishes. He will push. He always has. He will make the letters braver. That is his work. Mine is to write them." He did not bless it. He did not burn it. He handed it back and said, "If your weighman takes coin to make a thumb heavier upon a scale, I will drown him and call it law." "If my weighman takes coin," Yara said, "I will throw him from the quay into your arms. Catch." Moin. Menderwand. The free dock opened on a day so thin you could see the ribs of it, bone-white sky, and the water a dark suggestion. Men came because men come to anything that might let them feel like thieves without risk. They paid their dock fees to a clerk who did not look impressed. And they bought meat pies, and they pissed where they should not, and they laughed in languages that were proud of how far they had come to make themselves understood. The mark, a kraken's eye within a ring, was stamped on a little slip of lead and hung from a thong. Men wore it sheepishly at first, then with a gambler's joy. Bravos pricked up its ears. The Iron Banks factor came, smelling faintly of cold metal and self-astonishment. He did not deign to speak on ink and ring when there was silver to be weighed. "Collateral," he said early and often in their meeting, making of the word a litany. "Security, guarantee." He pronounced them all as if they were birds he had trained to sit on his wrist. "Timber," Yara said. "We own stands cut and stacked on harlaw.ol. The reader will let you count them and write their numbers in your own books, if it comforts you. Nemtau. Timber rots," the factor said. "We do not," Yara replied. "We persist. We are annoying that way." He did not smile. He did look, briefly, almost humanly, tired. "We do not loan to women with pretty words, Captain. We loan to forces. You have made yourself into a force. It is untidy. Charter it," Yara said. "Write your ink on mine. Put enough chains around my free dock to please you, and then watch as we cut the links we must and leave the rest. You will be paid. You will tell stories in your cold hall about the kraken who counted. You will make your apprentices memorize the interesting parts, and you will leave out the parts that made you uncomfortable when you held the pen." "Nembersol. You are irritating," he said. "So are you?" she answered. They signed. The reader drank wine and added a footnote. Aaron sulked until a fisher's wife told him he was handsome when he glowered, and then he glowered more as if doing duty by her compliment. Theon taught Hala the bowline and the clove hitch, and how to curse kindly when a knot refused to turn. She learned with the greedy exactness of youth that has not been taught yet to waste itself. "I never thought to like the way rope feels," she admitted one dusk. Palms bruised, eyes alight. "It bit me, and then it told me its name." "It bites less when you stop pretending your hands are delicate," Theon said. "They aren't. They are made for honesty. Rope respects honesty." She rubbed a thumb over the tender place the belt had left on his forearm, and then snatched her hand back with a start, as if she had touched some ceremonial wrongness. He laughed, surprising himself. "Go on," he said. "Be rude. It will teach me I am not something easily broken anymore." "Were you?" she asked timidly, and he shook his head. "I was something a man made into pieces. Now I am something that knows all its pieces and can choose which to show. That is different. That is stronger." News traveled oddly certain ways, and not others. From the arbor came a letter with a wax that smelled faintly of something pleasant, even through cold. Basil and salt, and the pride of vines well tended. Lord Paxter did not sign it. His factor, a red wine with a wine-stained birthmark like a spilled rulebook on his temple, did. He spoke of capacity, casks, the way winter increases the price of a swallow. He spoke with an embarrassment privately acknowledged when he wrote, "Despite history, we could do business, Captain." If your men keep their hands to themselves and their eyes on their cups, my master will sell you wine cheap, and you will sell our wine dear, and the world will continue to circle the sun without asking our leave." He attached a neat schedule of tides and a list of the arbor's small needs: iron nails, chain for the breakwater, tar, lamp oil. Men are simple when their needs are true. "Go," the reader said. "Send Harl. Send Foam Fang. Send one of Jella's homely beauties. Red wines like to mock before they respect. Let them mock. Return with casks enough to call this winter less than devout." Yara went herself, because pride is a tool when used with restraint and a rope when used otherwise. The arbor rose from green to gray, to a stone that was green again in men's minds, because of longing. The air owed them sweetness, and paid only enough to suggest it might provide more in better seasons. The red wine factor met them with a smile tugged down carefully, the way a flag is lowered in respectful weather. His name was Omer, and he complained loudly about his knees, which, he said cheerfully, had not been designed by the same god who designed the island. "You do not seem afraid of me," Yara commented as he led her along a breakwater that sniffed at the tide and found it adequate. "I am afraid of all who carry axes," he said, "but I am more afraid of my master's numbers. They have teeth. Do you know how Pylus accounts for evaporation?" he added, wondrous as a boy, and then put a hand to his mouth. "Listen to me. I am turning into my father. Forgive me. The casks are ready. They are backed by the wine of men who have never seen you. They will drink later and tell stories, and use the words 'in spite of' and 'nevertheless.' That is a victory of a sort." It was. Yara watched coil upon coil of Vine's summer sweat loaded into her holds, and felt her mouth flood with imagined sweetness, and with the acid of fear. If one boy went missing on this island, if one ring were cut from one soft hand, everything would fall in upon itself like a rotten hull. She walked the deck with her men in the cool of evening, and said nothing that sounded like a speech. She looked at each man as if he were the last plank in the hull, and not one had a right to spring. They left the arbor with their decks reeking of happiness. The storm that came upon them was petty, and did not deserve the name. They outsailed it with the arrogance of men who have earned a little. In Lordsport the casks rolled into the free dock as if glad of pike's stone. The first cup to be poured at the tavern known as the Copper Ear made a man cry for his mother, and another man propose to a bench. Bread and wine and lamplight make of a market a chapel. Aaron glared at the chapels he could not own, and then stalked to the surf to sing at waves that have always loved men who sing to them in winter. The sea listened with the indifference she gives to gods and to engineers alike. Christopher Drum did not last a season as a guard before biting his own rope. He had done well in 2 convoys, railed in 3, and in the 4th he had found temptation more persuasive than custom. A merchant out of Tyrosh, round as a bishop's story, had bristled him on sight. His men had kept their hands until the Tyroshi's clerk had laughed at a drum joke and mentioned, foolishly, that there was a girl below with a voice like an expensive oath. Christopher's old thoughts rose, and with them the useless courage of sentimental men. He took 3 steps toward the companionway, and Hala stood in it. She did not lift her knife. She said, clearly enough to be a kind of blade, "No." He stopped because she had surprised him, and surprise is a substance in which courage loses its pattern. He raised his hand as if to push her aside. Theon's hand closed around his wrist. Nothing dramatic followed. Quiet sometimes carries a gallows with it. They took Christopher off the Tyroshi's deck, in view of the crew, and placed him under the eye of 3 of Jella's men, whose idea of mercy was to keep him fed so he would not call hunger justice when he died. Yara made the trial ugly and public. On the free dock, men came to watch as they come to watch any stitch that might hold 2 parts of their world together. Christopher leaned to insolence because men teach their necks how to stand that way young, and it becomes a part of bone. Yara did not give a speech. She did not let Aaron give one either, and his mouth made the shape of injury without sound. "You agreed," she said to Christopher. "You broke." "I am Ironborn," he said. "I do not agree except to raid." "You agree now to drown," she said. "And I agree to let the sea judge whether she wants you." He smiled, relief slipping across his face that even he did not fully understand. He had been looking for a stage, and drowning is a kind of stage on Old Wyke. But this was the free dock, and the audience had come from Bravos and Old Town, and the Sisters' Green Hills by mistake. She did not hand him to Aaron. She walked him to the quay and bound his ankles with good rope, and tied the other end to a barrel that had known honest fish. "What are you doing?" he asked, struggling for outrage and finding mostly confusion. "I am making a promise visible," she said. She pushed the barrel over. It hit the water with a slap. The rope drew tight. Christopher went clumsy as any man would. He went in with less grace than a sack, and there is a kind of justice in that. The rope went slack. It went taut. Men watched because the sea makes spectators of us. Bubbles. A hand. Silence. The barrel rolled and rolled as if bored. Yara did not look at Aaron. Hala stood with her jaw set so hard it would remember this decision until teeth shook loose in old age. When the rope went slack and did not take again, Yara had Harl Hall. Christopher came up with the sea's opinions all over him. She cut the rope. She did not bless him. She did not strip him and oil him and place him in a narrative he would have liked. She let him lie. The Taroshi and the Bravosi saw. The Ironborn saw. The Free Dock saw. Men spit. Men nodded. Men were quiet because quiet is what follows mercy and what follows brutality. And it is a useful quiet, either way. She went home and slept badly. In the morning, she ate bread and counted coin. The world can be carried for a time with such handles. The charter grew the way a child grows. Haphazardly, with adequate food, and in spite of the weather. The reader annotated. Aaron scrawled a line so salty it stained 3 pages around it and then preened when men laughed. The Iron Banks factor built himself a stool in Yara's counting shed and sat upon it, as if upon a throne he had purchased with good sense. Men learned to say, receipt, without blushing. The Free Dock developed smells. Hot iron, frying onions, wet wool, and they layered into an aroma Yara could identify blindfolded as home. At night, she sat with Theon on Black Wind's aft bench and watched Hala sleep, where men pretend they do not observe one another. Theon spoke without looking at Yara. "I wrote a letter once," he said, "in a hall that wanted me dead by a dozen methods. I wrote to a girl with red hair and a mouth that knew too much about swallowing grief. I told her she was no one, and then I told myself it meant I could be anyone. It was a stupid letter. It was a cruel letter. It was a letter a man writes, who believes words are lighter cargo than deeds. This," he gestured at the Free Dock, at the lights, at the slow comfort of coin counted and not spilled. "This is a letter written with wood and rope. It is harder to burn. We could still set it alight by mistake," Yara said. "One boy. One bad laugh at the wrong time. One old man who breaks his promise and decides a god will forgive him because he has learned how to hold his breath. We will make more letters," Theon said. "We have ink enough." The gull tower in Seaguard gained a new bell. Smaller, its voice less sure of judgment, and more inclined toward information. The Hightower's factor wrote that he had found a clerk who smiled when he said the words Free Dock, and that might be as close to love as men of his class come. Old Town purchased pitch as if they had become enamored of fires that did not blind their guests. The Arbor sent casks and asked after rope and sent gossip about a Tyrell cousin who could not keep his hands out of purses, without being told 19 times a day that webs are not for fingers. White Harbor wrote that bread broke less slowly now. Bravos demanded a heavier hand upon men who came wrapped in unfamiliar law and reminded Yara that coin is faster than tide. It turns without asking what the moon wishes. Winter leaned on and then, exhausted by its own weight, loosened. The ice at the harbor's lips softened into slush the color of gulls' bellies. Everything smelled briefly of rot, and then, strange and quick, of possibility. The first fish of the kind that taste of spring were cut open on planks, still scarred by the winter's lessons. Yara dreamed again of a red door and woke annoyed, but less angry than before. She had purchased that dream honestly now with a dozen loaves, and with one man lowered into water without the courtesy of a hymn. Maps were spread on the reader's table, like two-dimensional sails. Roderick's finger tapped Dorne's eastern lip where the green blood poured itself into the sea like a scarf. "Planky Town," he said, incurably pleased by words that make children giggle and men pretend not to. "Glass, Ishris. Why not as smug as the arbors and copper with a natural modesty? They do business with the Summer Isles, and with those who like to pretend they do not do business." "Dorne doesn't love us," Yara said. "They don't love anyone who rides too hard and takes without a kiss. They love gold," the reader replied. "They love stories about men they have made to mind their manners. They love the way wind from the sea brings the smell of money, and the way it carries those who might otherwise be too much trouble for them. Inland where they can see their trouble coming on a road. They are practical. They cloak their practicality in a poetry you will find exasperating, and you will learn to enjoy it in self-defense. Then see. Send letters," Yara said. "Send Harl. I'll follow when the wind is right." Harl went with Foam Fang and Ugly Duck, 2 letters of introduction, and the instruction to use his face as a battering ram, only if he saw the chance to laugh while doing it. He returned with a cask of something that turned Harl's eyebrows up, as if the drink were an insult politely delivered. A crate of green lemons, and the news that the orphans on the Greenblood had good rope and better songs, and that one of them had suggested, straight-faced and certain, that the Ironborn were in truth river-born because all seas are but big rivers unwilling to admit they are not special. "People say things in Dorne," Harl said, mystified and charmed. "They say them with a smile, and then they sell you something." "We can work with that," Yara said. On the day she cast off for Planky Town herself, Aeron came to the quay with water in his beard, and a new fierceness in his eyes. He had not forgiven her for Christopher's drowning that was not a drowning of his kind. He had reshaped his forgiveness into something he could preach. "What is dead may never die," he said softly, almost kindly, "but rises again, harder and stronger." He looked over her shoulder at the merchant hulls, at the fat bellies that had learned to ride, and a reluctant smile peeled his face. "Harder," he said, "and stronger. Perhaps fatter too. Perhaps," she said. "What is hungry may be fed, and what is fed may be greedy. Then we will count the loaves," she said. He took a rope end from her hand and tied it to a cleat with the competence of a man who has never allowed himself to forget that he was once simply useful. "Do not let the Dornish women kiss you without stealing your purse," he said. "I do not let anyone kiss me without stealing something." She replied. And he laughed. A shock of youth escaping a mouth set too long in chastity. They ran south under a sky so clear it asked for chalk lines to chart its emptiness. Black Wind liked the journey as if the angle of the breeze had been designed for her curiosity. Theon watched Hala, and Hala watched the sea, and the sea pretended not to watch any of them. Gela sat with a bolt and a hammer and repaired a fitting as if she could not be bothered to leave ship for shore until Wood obeyed her. Yara stood with the old attentiveness that looks like leisure to those who do not know the weight of vigilance. Planky Town appeared as a series of statements made by men who do not trust land. Houses on stilts kept their feet out of the river's mouth. Planks ran and ran like thoughts that had not been interrupted by caution long enough to be repaired. The orphans watched from boats with sails dyed a patient green. They had faces that suggested they were all cousins and laughter that suggested they were all liars. Yara loved them at once because she could see exactly how they would cheat her, and because they would make a religion of bragging about it later. "You have come to buy sand you will call glass," said a woman whose hair was bound in a roll at the nape of her neck, arms varnished with sun. "I have come to buy the idea of sand," Yara said. "You will sell me the labor that turns it to glass, and then you will tell me how much more I owe for the story that will make Northerners believe their wine has become finer because they can see it better." The woman laughed. "I am Jinnah of the Orphans," she said. "I will sell you oranges that could improve a prince and sand that will make your drink smug. Bring rope." "I bring rope," Yara said. "I bring coin and good manners." Jinnah's eyebrow asked if that last were a joke. Yara discovered she could enjoy being doubted. They traded rope for fruit, coin for glass, civility for civility, couched in the insolent tone of those who live at the place where river marries sea. Yara's men kept their hands. Yara kept her temper. The orphans kept their dignity and their money in equal parts. They left with their holds smelling like summer had been stolen and tucked away in sacks. On deck, Theon peeled an orange and inhaled, as if scent alone could make him into something he had wanted to be before any of this. Hala bit into hers with the impatience of appetite, and juice ran down her wrist. Yara sucked her thumb and tasted a sweetness she had not earned, and decided to earn it next time twice over. The wind turned fickle and then forgiving. At night, they lay on the deck and watched a sky so mastered by stars, it looked like a net. Harl snored a sea song with no words. Gela dreamt with her eyes open. Shipwrights are never fully asleep. Theon pointed to a line of lights along the horizon that were not stars at all, but other ships like them. Other men and women balancing hunger and law and the habit of their hands against the accident of the sea. "Do you think we will keep it?" he asked suddenly, as if the question had been rock in his mouth and he had only now become confident enough to spit it out. "Do you think any of this will last? Or will a prince put a paper crown on and burn us to prove to his father he knows where to set a torch?" "I cannot promise a world," Yara said. "Only a tide. I can promise the work of the next tide. I can promise I will be there with a rope and a knife and a ledger and a laugh, if we can afford one. That is as much as the sea ever offers." She looked at him, at Hala asleep open-mouthed, at Gela's hands twitching with repairs she would make in the morning. "It is as much as I dream of now." He nodded. The orange in his hand looked like a lamp. The free docks mark, a kraken's eye within a ring, caught a bit of starlight where it hung against the mast, and winked. The wind carried up from the hold a faint, stubborn aroma of bread, the way a memory insists upon itself when the present grows too thin. Yara closed her eyes and listened to the hull's small talk with the sea. The ship told her it was seaworthy, and the sea told her not to grow cocky. She believed both in equal portion. The night made room for morning the way a ledger makes room for a new column. They sailed on into their own arithmetic.